The 2020 Philadelphia Eagles will simply go as far as Carson Wentz takes them. This is the season of Carson Wentz, in my opinion. This is the season that Wentz has to finally put that final nail in the coffin of all the critics and show he is truly a top five elite quarterback. If we do that, it could be a special season. But make no mistake, this is the year of the Wentz. What's up, Eagles Nation? What's going on, NFL world? How you doing, division rivals? This is Steven Hyder with Gate City Sports Channel, the sports channel where the cerebral NFL fan comes for about 10 minutes of daily content. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whenever it is you get around to watching this. Once again, guys, my name is Steven Hyder, and this is Gate City Sports Channel. All right, y'all. Today's topic. We're talking Wentz, guys. I want to talk about advanced metrics used to measure the productivity of a quarterback. There's a lot of guys out here, when you watch these sports channels, right? When you watch these commentators and these, not analysts, these are more like sports personalities, where they'll give these hot takes. And I don't mean to disparage anybody in the sports media world, but truth be told, there's a lot of guys out here that either don't know the information or don't know how to use the advanced analytics properly, or they're doing things to be a provocateur and actually try to invoke emotion out of people in order to generate views, in order to generate more money. And look, I'm not going to knock a business model, okay? Because as a business model, the provocateur is very successful. When you invoke emotion out of people, you get them to stick with it. They watch it even though they might hate it, or they watch it because they completely agree with it even if it's not factually based. What I want to do is I want to separate fact from fiction. I want to take a look at Carson Wentz's metrics, and I want to talk to you guys about what I see, what's going on, and what Carson has to do to become the next level. We know the abilities are there. I haven't heard any legitimate people trying to argue about Carson Wentz's abilities. The arguments revolve around two things: health and production throughout the course of a season, course of a career. Those are the two arguments I've heard. I want to break it down. I want to look at what's going on here. And I'm going to talk about, hey, can we have faith and can we have hope in some of the additions we've brought into the organization? All right, y'all, without further ado, we're going to dive into not really film study, but more so advanced analytics today. All right, y'all, let's get it. All right, guys, I want to throw out a few questions for you and how you use these advanced metrics, okay, these advanced analytics to tell these type of stories, right? To have a meaningful discussion around it, where it's just not a provocateur type situation. So, look, let's just ask some basic things here, guys. How do you measure how well a quarterback processes information? Look, gentlemen, and ladies, I'm not talking about the Wonderlic test. That is a fascinating topic. I would love to dive into it. That ain't going to be today, guys. Maybe later on this week or something. What I'm talking about is, when I say process information, I'm talking about how well this individual can read coverage, right? How well he gets through his progressions, right? So his first read, his second read, his third read, fourth read, subsequent reads. You get what I'm saying? How quickly he can understand and recognize, curveballs that are being thrown at him by a defense, right? And then lastly, basically how he can see holes in the defense. That's what I mean when I say something like how a quarterback processes information, all right? Furthermore, how do you measure if a quarterback is nothing more than just a check down stat accumulator, all right? How do you measure, exterior circumstances that can impact the game, such as line play, the offensive line play? When you're talking about production coming out of the skill position players and how that impacts the quarterback, right? And like the way all this kind of ties into how does that affect the quarterback's numbers? Like, how do you really know it's the quarterback, it's the scheme, or it's the team around him? You have to understand, simply put, guys, how to read into these advanced analytics to discern that information. And that's where a lot of these sports personality guys either have no interest in doing it because it's just not it's not going to provoke emotion as much, or they're not really interested in having that kind of a deep discussion. Simply put, they're just not going to spend the time to find out. It's too much research. It's too much work to actually do it for them. So they either don't have the skill or they don't have the willpower to want to do it. One of those things is going on here, guys. And really what we're talking about is can we really discern from the information how well a quarterback reads the field? Okay? How good is the quarterback? That's what we're trying to figure out here, guys. So without further ado, let's get into some advanced metrics and let's break it down. And I'm going to break down for you just exactly how well Carson Wentz was playing and why he ranks where he ranks on some of these metrics. How do we discern that information to separate Carson's play versus everything else? All right, y'all, let's get it. All right, ladies and gents, let me tell you the 5 advanced analytics, measurements I'm going to use today to have this discussion. I want to talk about completed air yards, intended air yards, the air yard differential, so the differential between those completed air yards and the intended air yards, the air yards to the sticks, right? So how close you're getting to the sticks, the first down marker, and then your time to throw. Some other things I feel like I need to disclose to you guys before we even talk about this is how did I filter the players, right, to come up with this list. So we all know if you went to NFL.com and you looked up like the advanced analytics, like you're going to get a million players thrown in there. So how did I filter it? Well, the first filter I put on it was 2,000 yards. If you didn't have at least 2,000 yards, I just filtered you out because you didn't play enough for me to honestly assess you. I don't think that's fair. But then what I ended up having happen was I only had 29 quarterbacks, so now I had to revise further. So what I did is I did a plus to minus ratio of 15%. They gave me exactly 32 quarterbacks to measure against. Yes, guys, I understand that 15% is a very large, margin, and those 3 quarterbacks will honestly be affected differently than other quarterbacks. I'm acknowledging that. So I'll just name those quarterbacks to you right now for fair comparison, all right? Case Keenum, Joe Flacco, Mason Rudolph. Those are the 3 guys that were added in as a result of that plus or minus 15%, okay? Now, most notably, let me cover some quarterbacks that will not be discussed today because they did not qualify based upon the criteria I'm throwing out there to you guys. Dwayne Haskins won't be talked about. David Blau, the quarterback from Detroit that took over for Stafford, won't be talked about. Eli Manning won't be talked about. Marcus Mariota won't be talked about. Drew Lock won't be talked about. Teddy Bridgewater won't be talked about. Devlin Hodges, the 3rd-string quarterback, I believe, from Pittsburgh, won't be talked about today. Obviously, Cam Newton clearly won't be talked about since he hardly played at all. But these are these are the measurements I'm using, and these are the criteria in which I've put together to filter through to get 32 quarterbacks. So let me just explain to you guys really quickly the way I see these 5 metrics and what they tell you about a quarterback. I'm going to go with the myth versus the truth of it. So the first myth you could say about something like, when you talk about completed air yards, right? Completed air yards. You could say, well, the car only really tells you if a guy's a check down quarterback. No, you need further context. That could be true, but you need further context to illustrate that point. You can look at something like intended air yards and say, well, that can tell you about a guy's arm strength, his deep ball abilities, things like that. Is this guy, continuation of, is he a check down guy? It can absolutely tell you that, but I don't think that's definitive on its own. You need to have more than just those 2 things. You look at air yard differential, right? Once again, we're getting into, okay, well, what's the differential? Like, is this guy a check down? I think now you're getting into a stronger sense of it, but you have to have everything in conjunction. You got to keep going. Air yards to the sticks, I think, is a really good measurement of whether a guy is a check down or not. But you still would have to discern from air yards to the sticks, is this a function of the scheme due to the players and the personnel available, right? And then lastly, your time to throw. Your time to throw, hey, man, what does that tell us about the scheme? What does that tell us about the offensive line play? What does that tell us about a quarterback's escapability? You know, his ability to, now you see me, now you don't, because that will obviously extend the amount of time you have to throw if you can escape, right? The myth of time to throw would be how well a quarterback sees the field, right? If a guy gets the ball out of his hands quickly, he must see the field well. Or if a guy gets the ball out of his hands quickly, he must be checking the ball down every time he steps out, right? There are myths associated with that as well. But larger context, that's what we're talking about today. So the raw data. When I filtered it, and I did this by 32 quarterbacks, given the criteria, when it comes to completed air yards, Carson Wentz ranked 20th in the league. When it comes to intended air yards, Carson Wentz ranked 19th in the league. When it comes to the air yard differential, this is where things got interesting to me. He ranked 10th in the league. When it comes to air yards to the sticks, so how far down on average he's throwing close to that first down marker, he ranked 14th in the league. And then lastly, when I looked at time to throw, Carson Wentz ranked 9th in the league in terms of how quickly he's getting the ball out of his hands. He was the 9th fastest quarterback in that decision-making process. So, full context, full things going on here. Let's talk. Completed air yards. He ranked 20th, right? Definitely not the most, glorified ranking, right? Let's talk about the guys that are in the area around him, okay? So what guys ranked in that area when we talk about completed air yards? You got Jimmy Garoppolo, Aaron Rodgers above him, okay? So they had 5.4, so they were throwing the ball a little shorter, okay? Then you have Case Keenum and Carson Wentz tied at 5.5 guys. And then you have the next three guys who are kind of just above Carson, and these guys throwing slightly deeper would have been Brady at 5.6, Sam Darnold at 5.6, and Daniel Jones at 5.7. Look, guys, the company's not bad when you got Rodgers, Wentz, Brady, Darnold, and Jones. Those are all guys that have decent arms. So I don't know that tells you too much yet, guys. I will say this. When I looked at some of the worst, I'm talking bottom of the league statistical guys, this is what I came up with. You got guys like Mason Rudolph, who had 4.5. It's horrible. That's clearly you're not throwing the ball downfield. You're not completing the ball downfield. You have guys like Derek Carr, 4.9, okay? You have guys like Joe Flacco, 5.1. Jacoby Brissett, 5.1. Kyler Murray, 5.1. Mitchell Trubisky, 5.1. Drew Brees, 5.2. Kyle Allen, 5.3. So that's just the way these stack when we talk about completed air yards. Nothing yet, guys. Don't put any of this into your head yet until you see the way it all shapes. Now let's talk about intended air yards, where you intend to throw the ball, okay? Carson Wentz ranked 19. So who are the guys around him in that area? Okay, so Daniel Jones at 8.1, Andy Dalton at 8.1, Mason Rudolph at 8. Then you got Wentz at 7.9. You got Jacoby Brissett at 7.9. Kirk Cousins at 7.9. Mitchell Trubisky at 7.9. Jared Goff at 7.8. Tom Brady at 7.6. So, bottom of the league guys, I'm talking about bottom of the league guys that just clearly you're not even intending to throw the ball down the field. And this is obvious when you look at your completed air yards versus your intended air yards. You got Derek Carr, 6.3, worst in the league. Jimmy Garoppolo, 6.5. Drew Brees, 6.7. Joe Flacco, 6.8. Case Keenum, 6.9. Kyler Murray, 7.1. And then I think those guys are distinguishedly really bad. That's a really bad stat line. You're way far below the rest of the league. And then I think you have these weird mid-tier. There's two guys that kind of fell in a weird mid-tier place, which was Gardner Minshew at 7.5, 7.5, and then Tom Brady at 7.6. Okay, you're starting to see more of a story develop here with guys like Derek Carr and stuff, okay? Now, let's go to the air yard differential. So the difference between where you intended to throw and where the balls are being completed, right, on average. So let's just talk about the guys that, simply put, are ranking there. He's top 10. So here are your guys, all right? You got Mason Rudolph, Aaron Rodgers, Josh Allen, Sam Darnold, Kyle Allen, Jacoby Brissett, Mitchell Trubisky, Phillip Rivers, Russell Wilson, Carson Wentz at 10. I'm going to give you the top 15. All right. Daniel Jones at 11. Patrick Mahomes at 12. All right. You got Baker Mayfield at 13. Jameis Winston at 14. Matthew Stafford at 15. That's your top 15 air yard differential. All right. Look at these numbers, and you can see a story starting to develop, but there's three separate stories you can tell here. The first story is, if you're looking at the air yard differential, so completed air yards versus, intended air yards, and then that differential, telling the stories of, number one, can guys see the field? There's young guys on this list like a Mason Rudolph who, look, he was one of the greatest air yard differentials. But if you look at what he threw, 13 touchdowns to 9 interceptions at a 62% completion rate, I would have adequate belief that maybe this kid is young. He's not afraid to let the ball go, but he's not seeing the field quite that well yet, right? And I'll give you some other guys that would fall into that category in my opinion. All right, you can go down and you can take a look at a guy like Baker Mayfield, 22 touchdowns, 21 interceptions, right? 59% completion rate. He clearly wasn't seeing the field that well, and they went back to an RPO style to help him see the field a little better, right? To give him a little better window to throw into. Jameis Winston, 33 touchdowns to 30 interceptions, 61% completion rate, right? Not scared to throw the ball down the field. He's got the physical tools. He's got the arm strength, but he's probably not seeing the field quite as well as some of the more elite kind of quarterbacks. Then I'd say there's a second category of guys that are very good at what they do, but let's just be honest, okay? There were some mitigating circumstances holding them back, okay? You look at a guy like Sam Darnold, who tossed 19 touchdowns to 13 interceptions, right? These are guys, I think, that are trying to do too much in the offense, okay? These are guys that are putting themselves in harm's way and causing these kind of statistics to happen because, let's just admit, things were going on. Line plays maybe not that great, maybe the skill positions, maybe injuries, whatever. You got Sam Darnold in that conversation with 19 touchdowns, 13 interceptions, 62% completion percentage. Guys, I am rounding up here for everybody. Then you can look at a guy like, Phillip Rivers, 23 touchdowns to 20 interceptions, 66% completion rate, okay? Mitchell Trubisky, 17 touchdowns to 10 interceptions, 63% completion rate. I think Trubisky you could put in either one of those categories. Not seeing the field well, trying to do a little too much in the offense because of things going on within the organization itself and the skill position players. But then you have the elite guys, right? You have guys that are elite on this list. And I think you start to see stories start to form here, guys. Aaron Rodgers, 26 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, 62% completion rate. All right? Clearly, lack of skill position players is hurting him. That's why you have such a big difference in the air yard distance here. Okay, differential, not distance, but from completed to intended, right? Sam Darnold, I think you could put in there in that kind of conversation. Then you got guys like, Russell Wilson, 31 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, 66% completion rate, right? But if you look at that differential, he's top 10. Obviously, a lack of skill position players is causing some of this to kind of become very apparent very quickly. Patrick Mahomes, okay? This is a harder one to explain, man, because he falls just outside of the top 10, but he's at 12. But he tossed 26 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, 66% completion rate. Not sure why there's such a difference in the air yard differential here compared to, basically his completed air yards versus his intended air yards. I think for Patrick Mahomes, I think the story lies more on YAC, yards after the catch. I think he's got a few guys like Mecole Hardman and Tyreek Hill that can complete their yards to where they finish the play, can definitely push that. They can push that number quite a bit. So now you look at, guys like Matthew Stafford, 19 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, 64% completion rate. All right. Look at a guy like, obviously, our guy here, who I think finishes out this conversation. You got Carson Wentz, 27 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, right? 64% completion rate. All right. I think it's obvious. There are certain names that keep popping up on these lists that become very obvious, guys, when you dig down into the analytics. The guys that keep popping up, and it tells you there's something more going on beneath the surface here. There's more of a story to it. It's Aaron Rodgers. It's Sam Darnold. I would say Jacoby Brissett qualifies in this, although I think he's one of the better backup quarterbacks. We can have the argument of whether or not he's starting caliber. Carson Wentz and Daniel Jones. I think there are clearly mitigating circumstances that held back the production of these players. Okay? And when you dig into the advanced analytics, you can see these guys are playing a lot better than what the maybe hardline numbers would tell you. You have to dig a little deeper. Now, the last thing I'd like to talk about, well, the last couple topics here is air yards to the sticks, okay? And then your time to throw. So when we look at air yards to the sticks, now we're talking about basically when you measure where that ball is getting completed at, how close to a first down marker are you? Matthew Stafford led the league at 1.8. Jameis Winston was the next guy up at 1.4. So he's pushing the ball down the field. Tannehill, 0.6. Prescott, 0.4 at 4. And in your top 5 is Russell Wilson at 0.2. Now 6 through 10 is Watson, Allen, Jackson, okay, Rodgers, and Darnold. So you got Watson, Allen, Jackson, Rodgers, and Darnold in your top 10. All right? Now, your top 15 would round out to be 11 would be Fitzpatrick, 12 would be Mayfield, 13 would be Allen, 14 would be Wentz, 15 would be Mahomes. Interesting enough, when you dig deeper in these analytics, storylines start to emerge. Like Wentz is throwing the ball downfield with the skill position players we had, with all the injuries that occurred, with everything going on. That's why I think adding speed to this offense, it's going to be a different story this year, guys. Things are going to look different. Now I want to talk about the back end. I want to go 25 through 32. So the back end of the league. You got Brady, negative 1.6 yards. So almost 2 yards short of a first down is where he's averaging his throws. Minshew, 1.8 yards. So he's in 26th. Kyle Murray, 1.9 yards in 27. Keenum, 1.9 yards, 29. Is Breeze, negative 2 yards. Flacco, negative 2.2. Derek Carr, negative 2.3. And then last is Garoppolo, negative 2.5. Guys, there are storylines you can easily see here if you just dig deep. Your check down quarterbacks are Brady, Kyler Murray, okay? I think Keenum is safe to say that about. Drew Brees is an obvious one. He's checking it down a lot, guys, and he's getting a lot of yak. Flacco is a check down artist. Derek Carr is the check down king, and so is Garoppolo. Like, those are your check down quarterbacks. When you dig deeper into the statistics and the analytics, you can see it. You just got to dig, and you got to put forth work and effort, which doesn't always happen. Now let's talk the last thing, which is time to throw, guys. All right, time to throw. Top 15 quarterbacks in terms of the longest amount of time to throw the football. Just judging, you can say a lot of things. We'll get into this, okay? The guy who had the most time to throw in the NFL was Kirk Cousins. Then Jacoby Brissett. Then Sam Darnold. Okay, then Lamar Jackson. Ryan Tannehill. Aaron Rodgers. Dak Prescott. Garner Minshew. Josh Allen, 9. Top 10, Russell Wilson. 11 through 15, Daniel Jones. Number 12 is Patrick Mahomes. Number 13 is Deshaun Watson. Number 14 is Derek Carr. Number 15 is Jared Goff. Here's the bottom of the league, guys. So I'm going to go 32 through 25, okay? This is the very bottom. But I'll shape this into context here. Andy Dalton had the least amount of time to throw of anyone in the league. Drew Brees had the second least amount of time to throw at 31. Ryan Fitzpatrick had the 30th, so he was 30. He was third. Joe Flacco was 4th. Phillip Rivers was 5th. Trubisky was 6th. Garoppolo was 7th. Stafford was 8th, okay? Those were your bottom of, least amount of time guys to throw. And if you went around up the top 10, Wentz is number 9. He's tied with Kyle Allen. And then number 10 would be Kyler Murray would be number 10. And then just outside the top 10 would be Brady at 11. There are different storylines to look at this. You can say offensive line play wasn't good at the bottom, but offensive line play was very good at the top. But are we saying that Sam Darnold had very good offensive line play? Because there's outliers here, right? Of course, you look at Minnesota. Minnesota had good offensive line play at times. I do think that they did provide the kid time to throw. I think the scheme helps. The running scheme helps them have that time to throw. You look at Jacoby Brissett. I agree. Jacoby Brissett benefited from a great offensive line, but not everything holds true there. Daniel Jones being 11th, like, come on, man. The Giants had a crappy offensive line. That's not what's going on here. So the other side to it is that some of these guys have escape ability, right? Russell Wilson didn't have a good offensive line, but he's top 10 in the amount of time he's allowed to throw. That's because he's hard to wrap up and tackle, right? You got guys like, Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson has that escape ability, right? Rodgers, although he's not like the fastest guy, he's very good at working the pocket and creating time for himself. The flip side of this is you look at the guys who had the least amount of time to throw. You can say, well, these are the guys that process and see the field very well and get the ball out of their hands. But now the problem becomes, are we really saying that Trubisky sees the field well? Come on. Are we saying Garoppolo sees the field well? Come on. You guys get what I'm saying here? Flacco didn't see the field well last year. I mean, he's got skill. He knows what he's doing, but let's just call a spade a spade. He didn't play well last year. These arguments are complex, guys. What I see is a quarterback in Carson Wentz who got the ball out of his hands quickly, despite what people think. He was 9th overall in the league in terms of getting that ball out of his hands, okay? His air yards through the sticks put him in the top 15 in the league. Not bad. That means he's not checking the ball down all the time. He's not that kind of guy, right? His air yard differential was 10th, right, in the league. He was top 10, which means skilled production players around him were not good. Simply put, they weren't good. When you look at the story of Carson Wentz, it's complex. I think this kid can absolutely play. I think this kid was he suffered from the lack of people around him last year. And he's going to fix it this year, in my opinion, guys. I honestly think he's going to turn it around. I think if you look at the advanced analytics, you can see how well this kid played. Not one wide receiver with over 500 receiving yards, but yet he's threw for over 4,000 yards. First time in NFL history that's happened. Tossed 27 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, right? Almost 65%, 64% completion percentage, okay? The kid's playing at a very high